going to be a little different. As you see, we've got the piano set up differently. And so our speaker today, and he's going to do more than just speak, he's going to do some things on the piano. His name is Don Draganski. And Don is, he's a composer. He's co-founder of the Pilgrim Chamber Players. He's a member of LLI at National Louis University, and he teaches over there. He's a volunteer at the Presbyterian Home. He's a published composer, as I said. There's too many to list. If you want to look at the things that he's composed, I would suggest you go to his website, and he can give that to you later. He was a music librarian at Roosevelt University from 1973 to 1998, and not a pianist, but a bassoonist with the Evanston Symphony Orchestra from 1986 to 2013. And with that, I'm going to let Don come up here, and if he wants to tell you anything else about himself, he will. But welcome, Don.
Okay, we're going to talk about melody today. I think when we talk about music, I think the first thing that comes to our mind is melody. Does it have a tune? Is it something you can whistle? You can remember? So we're going to talk about melody. We're going to kind of look under the hood of melody and trying to figure out how composers have written melodies, what kind of material they use to put them together. But it's not a course on how to write good melodies. If there was a formula on how to write a good melody, I wouldn't be here. I'd probably be at some estate in Palm Springs. No, you can write two melodies, both of which are very, very well formed, but one will leave you cold and the other one will inspire you. So there's this crazy thing called the creative element. So one more warning I want to give you. I'm not a pianist. My piano playing is serviceable at best. As Jay mentioned, my instrument is actually bassoon. So with that, let's start with using a Socratic method. What is a melody? Anybody want to just kind of volunteer a possible definition of what they think a melody is?
Sequence of notes.
I'm sorry.
A sequence of notes.
A sequence of notes. Good. All right, good start. Anything else? Okay. I think that's about as far as we can go, because if I say a melody is a sequence of notes, and if I say it's a sequence of notes that's pleasing, then we get in trouble, because immediately you get into a subjective element. Well, you know, what's pleasing for one person is going to turn off somebody else. So I would say, and I came up with this definition, you can agree with it or not. A melody is a succession of notes that the listener perceives as a single entity. In other words, it usually has a recognizable beginning, middle, and an end. Okay, all right. So, with that, is this a melody? No. It's a sequence of notes. That's plural. There's only one note. How about this? Well, it could be, but you know, it would kind of lead to something. How about this? At this point, you say, well, come on, do something. Is that a melody? No. No, that's not a melody. That's a motive. Now, what's the difference between a melody and a motive? Well, a melody is self-contained. As I say, it has a beginning, middle, end, but a motive is like a seed or like a brick. It needs development. I mean, for instance, Beethoven goes, then he repeats it, but then what does he do? He starts to develop it. And you're off and running. See? All right. There's also another term which you should know, and that is a theme. Now, what is a theme? Well, the theme is sort of halfway between a melody and a motive. Let's stick with Beethoven. The Eroica starts like this. That's a theme. It has a melodic contour, obviously, but it needs development. You have to go further with it. It has to do more with it. So you've got melody, you've got theme, and you've got motive, and sort of three tiers. There's a big gray area between, obviously, but I think these three terms, I think, are pretty clear in your mind. Okay. Suppose I do this. Is that a melody? 5 notes. Well, it could be. Schubert uses it in his Fifth Symphony. And all it is 5 notes again. Dee dee da 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 da. Dee da 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 da. Or here's one with 6 notes. Magic Flute Overture of Mozart, for instance. Or here's a beautiful example of melody just with just repeating notes. The Beethoven Fourth Symphony, just 5 notes. Or this one here. That's the introduction to this. I'm told, by the way, that when Cole Porter wrote this for whatever musical he was writing for, there was one actor who didn't have much of a voice. He had a monotone. And the producer went to Cole Porter and said, you got to write a song that the guy can only sing on one note. Cole Porter says, all right, I'll write you One Night and Day. That may be apocryphal, but I think it shows that a composer can write some really beautiful melodies within given constraints. You know, if there are conditions that he has to meet, you can do it. Okay. All right. So we can write a nice melody just on repeated notes. Now let's talk about intervals. What is an interval? Well, an interval is simply nothing but a space between two notes. There's a small interval. There's a big interval. No problem. Can we write a melody on any interval of the scale? And the answer is yes, and I'm going to show you that it's true. I want you to keep track, by the way. This is 1, and this is 2. All right? This is the very smallest interval there is, from 1 to 2. So stormy weather, or if you want something a little more elevated. Okay, all right. The next interval is 1, 2, 3. I want you to keep count, by the way. We did 1, 2, now we're going to do 1 through 3. 1, 2, 3. Ferro Jock. But this is a wonderful example of this particular interval. Now, what's interesting about this melody is that it's built up of motives, what we talked about a little while ago. And then he repeats it again, and again, and then 1 step down, and then again, and then a step down again. And with the right harmonies, you have an absolutely gorgeous melody, just a sequence of motives, just over and over again. Let's play it again. It's just such a wonderful example of how to write a beautiful melody using the simplest means possible. Marvelous piece. Okay, let's see. That was 3. What's the next one? 4. Okay, 4. All right, 4. That's called a minor third. All right. Here's one. That's a minor third. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, where my little doggone? That's okay. But how about Beethoven? Third piano concerto starts in the third. Lots of melodies start in the third, so I'm not going to worry about that too much. What's the next number? 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, let's see. So, okay, all right. Next one is 6. All right, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now that's a very interesting interval. It's called a fourth, by the way. And it's interesting because it's part of the overtone series, very much part of the early part of the overtone. Now, what's the overtone series? If I take a string, for instance, and I start vibrating it, let's say that string vibrates at 100 vibrations per second, 100 hertz. Okay, the string is also vibrating within itself at sub things. It vibrates at 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700. You don't hear them, but what those different overtone partials give the note this particular quality. So when I play this, you know it's a piano, a cello or a bassoon or somebody comes in and that sounds different, but it's the same number of pitches, but the overtone series, the overtone partials are different. I'm going to show you what I mean. You probably can't hear it in this hallway, but I'm going to press down all the keys, as many as I can, without sounding them, but open them up. And I'm going to hit a note, and I want you to see if you can hear the strings that vibrate sympathetically. Can you hear that? What you hear is... So this particular interval is very much part of the overtone series. Now, if you take a brass instrument, a natural brass instrument, like a hunting horn or a bugle, which is to say a brass instrument that doesn't have valves or pistons or slides, the only notes that they can get are in the overtone series, like this. So a bugle will go, because of the only notes that are available on that particular horn. And of course, Wagner, he loves to do very heroic stuff. That interval has a certain military sound to it. But it can also be used very eloquently. There's a fourth. Let's see. The Seguidilla from Carmen. It's on a fourth. All right. What's the next number? Oh, by the way, one more fourth. I just thought of another fourth that you might know. Fiddle on the Roof. Okay. Okay. Fifth. All right. The next time is what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. How many? 7? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh my, that is an interval that has a really interesting history. It's called a tritone, by the way. By the way, there's only one, very, very few songs beginning with this particular interval. The one that I can think of that you might be familiar with is Maria from West Side Story. So forth. But the interesting thing about that interval, back in the Middle Ages and early Renaissance, it was called Diabolus in Musica. It was called the devil in music. Now, why in the world would an innocent interval be called demonic or devilish? What's so awful about that interval? Well, theorists like to have everything fit into a nice, neat box. And if something doesn't fit into the theory, then they get all upset about it. So this particular interval just didn't fit this whole theoretical structure that was being built for counterpoint, for harmonies. And so you had to avoid it as much as possible. And if you couldn't avoid it, there were all sorts of rules that you had to enter it, and all sorts of rules on how to exit from it. And this went on until about the 19th century, when composers finally decided, well, what's so wonderful about, what's so terrible about that interval? Let's use it. And the first person to really break the ice was Mussorgsky. In his opera Boris, one of the big climactic moments is early in the opera when Boris is crowned Tsar of Russia. Now, what Mussorgsky wanted to do was to replicate the sound of church bells in the orchestra. Now, church bells don't sound like this. Not unless it's some cheap carillon. They go bingity, bangity, bangity, bang, almost kind of at random. So Mussorgsky got the idea, I'm going to use that tritone. And he took this tritone, put it way down at the bottom of the orchestra. big tolling bell. Then he asked himself, what two chords that are not related to one another have those two notes in common? And it was this one. And it sounds like bells. What's wonderful. And this whole thing is built on tritones. The devil in music suddenly is used to make church bells, which is kind of a high irony about that. Okay, so what happens, I got to talk more about this interval because it's so interesting. Rimsky-Korsakov said, that's a nice idea. I wonder if I can use that interval for melodic purposes. So in Scheherazade, the orchestra holds a tritone, the horn goes, trumpet goes, and if you take those two notes and rearrange them, you get two chords, which are, guess what? A tritone apart. So then Stravinsky comes along and he says, wait a minute, instead of alternating those two chords, why don't we play them simultaneously? And you get this. Petrushka. And it wasn't just the Russians that suddenly became enamored of the tritone. Rimsky-Korsakov in Danse Macabre uses it to great effect. He uses a solo violin. Now a violin is tuned into these strings, G, D, A, E. And Saint-Saëns tells the violinist, take that top string and tune it down a half step so that you get a tritone on the two top strings. So if you remember how Danse Macabre goes, it's all built on tritone. So now the wonderful thing about that interval is that something that was taboo, that was forbidden, has suddenly become an absolute basis for composers using as art. It's just an incredible, I could give you a history of every interval, but that particular interval has a really fascinating history. Well, let's get back to the intervals. This is sort of a sidebar. Where did we leave off? 7. What's next? 8? 6, 7, 8. Okay. That's easy. A lot of songs start with a fig. Or how about this? Maple Leaf Rap. Starts on the 5th. Next interval. How many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh, you know that one, don't you? Tristan and Isolde. That interval has such a wonderfully plaintive sound, doesn't it? Which is just perfect for an opera like Tristan, you know, talking about love and death and all that other stuff. Okay, what's the next interval? Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. My Bonnie lies over the ocean. My Bonnie lies over the sea. That's easy, no problem. We're not worry about the 6th. All right. The 7th, the next one, how many intervals? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Oh, no, 11. I'm sorry, 11. Skipped one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay. That's a very interesting interval. Not many songs that begin with that interval. The only one I can think of that you might be familiar with, again, it's from West Side Story, Sometime. Okay, but the next one, which is how many? 12? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's a hard interval to sing, isn't it? Try to sing that interval. Da, da. It's a hard one, isn't it? But Verdi pulls it off. in Aida. And then the last interval, which is the octave, that's all 13 steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Over the rainbow. Okay, now, the point is that I've shown you that you can write a melody on any interval going up. And the same thing is true. I could go through the whole series showing how to a melody going an interval down. I'm not going to go through the whole series, take my word for it. But let's just take that last one, that really awkward one, that major seventh. Can you imagine? Let's just turn it upside down and go down that many steps. Wow, there's a hard interval. Sounds like a donkey break. Ee-aw, ee-aw. But Cole Porter pulls it off, and I love you. It's a beautiful song out of this crazy interval. All right, those are intervals. Now we talk about can composers talk about write songs on chords? Well, that's of course. Why not? Come on, you know that one, don't you? Blue Danube Waltz, obviously. All right, how about or this one? There's another chord. I could have danced all night for My Fair Lady, also with help on chords, all right? You could also take a chord and rearrange them. For instance, going back to the Beethoven Eroica Symphony, that's the chord that he uses. And he writes the theme. Simply rearranging a chord. Or Mozart, for instance, he takes two chords, this one and that one, and then writes a melody by simply rearranging the notes. So forth, eine kleine Nachtmusik. All right? The same is true of minor triads, too. Let's see, Beethoven, Fourth Piano, Third Concerto. So forth. But there's a wonderful use of a minor triad in, again, getting back to Verdi and Otello. In the opera, after Otello strangles Desdemona and realizes what a damn fool he's been, he goes and he goes to the body of Desdemona and has the last kiss. And as he approaches the body, it has a wonderful use of this simple little triad. And then the kiss motive. Lovely. And those same notes can be used in a very different setting. The New World Symphony, which is simply a minor chord, all right? Okay, scales. Now we come to scales. Can we build melodies on scales? You bet we can. All right. Let's take a simple little scale like this. I'm a little teapot, short and stout. Here are my handle, here is my spout. No problem there. But take the same notes and see what a master can do with them, like Verdi. Celeste Aida, from just Just a simple little scale. How about a downward scale? Going back to Verdi again. Carinome from Iglo. Now notice what Verdi does. He takes a simple scale, and by just simply adding a little hesitation on those first two notes, he completely transforms it, which gives you a good example of how composers can do so much wonderful magic by the absolute tiniest little touches. You know, from this to, which is really quite wonderful. All right, minor scales. Wow. Brother, can you spare a dime? That's a simple minor scale. All right. Now, the interesting thing about what we talked about so far, we've only talked about major and minor scales. Now, back in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, there were no less than 6 scales that were in common use. But they seem to have dropped out by the time the Baroque era came around. And if you look at Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier, he has 48 preludes and fugues just in major and minor, and he ignores all the rest of them, because there was Ionian, Dorian, excuse me, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and then there was a Locrian, which nobody used because it had a tritone in it. All right. I'm not going to go through these modes except to show you that that it wasn't until the 19th century, again, usually in Russia and in France, that there became a revival of interest in these old modes. The modes were still used in liturgical music, but in concert music they were pretty much neglected. But you find them in folk music. For instance, the Dorian mode. Green sleeves. Or Phrygian mode. Brahms used it in his Fourth Symphony. Okay, so forth. All right. Now, all the scales that I've talked about so far have one thing in common. They have 7 different pitches and octave. We usually think of octave as the same note, only on different registers. I mean, this note is not the same as this note, obviously, but in terms of vibrations, it has a ratio of 1 to 2, and our ear seems to be built to hear that as the same note, only in different registers. So it's really what we call the same pitch class. So anyway, there are 7 pitches: do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, and then do again. But how about scales that have other forms? How about a scale at only 6 notes? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 octave. That's known as a whole tone scale. And Debussy liked that one a lot. One of the preludes started like that. The curious thing about that scale, though, is that it doesn't have any gravitational center. Now, what I mean by that is, in a normal scale, each note wants to go somewhere. If I go like this, that one note wants to go up, and this one wants to drop down. But in this one, every note is the same. There's no gravitational pull. One note is as good as another, which means that you have to use that scale very, very sparingly. Well, let's go down. How about a scale of 5 notes? Pentatonic scale from the Greek penta. All right. If you look at the black keys on the piano, that's a pentatonic scale: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 octave. And that scale is ubiquitous. It's found all over the world. No matter what the indigenous music is, no matter what the folk music is, they're going to find some form of the pentatonic scale. And particularly China, for instance, I can sit here and do fake Chinese music all day just on the black keys. Okay, so forth. But it can also be used in tunes. For instance, here's a song that you know, it's in the pentatonic scale. cheated. There's one note that was not pentatonic, but the rest of them were. But in folk music, you find them all over the place. Here's a beautiful example of the pentatonic scale. Amazing Grace, and only 5 notes, only 5 simple little notes. All right, how about going the opposite direction? We have a scale with 7 notes plus the octave. How about a scale that has 8 pitches plus the octave? It's called the octatonic scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 octave. All right? That scale was developed in Russia for the most part. Some people say Rimsky-Korsakov invented it, but that's not really true. It was in the air. It's a scale that Shostakovich found particularly interesting, one of his favorite scales. In fact, you know, Shostakovich had a signature. And if you take those notes and put them in German solmization, it spells out D-S-C-H, D-S-C-H, his name. Which part of it? Octatonic scale. All right. Now, to give you an idea of the octatonic scale and what it sounds like, being a composer, you don't think that I would come here and not use the opportunity to play one of my own pieces. So this is a prelude I wrote, which is an octatonic scale, and I think it will give you an idea of what it sounds like, how different it sounds like from all the other scales we talked about. It's a lovely scale. It's a really beautiful scale. and one reason why it's kind of so interesting is because a regular scale divides the octave as a perfect fifth, but this scale divides, guess where? The tritone. The tritone has become so ubiquitous. It's really quite amazing. Okay, chromatic scale. All the notes in the octave, all 12 notes. Okay. How about this? Verdi. Il Trovatore, Caccio le Note. Or how about this one? There's a good chromatic. Circus music, all chromatic. Or, Afternoon of a Faun. Okay, all right. Alban Berg took all 12 notes and he rearranged it into a wonderful ladder of intervals in his violin concerto. Those are all 12 notes, just rearranged in a wonderful ladder. Here's a melody based on all 12 notes, and I want you to guess who the composer is. Who would you guess wrote that? Schoenberg? Mozart, believe it or not. Mozart. It's part of a jig that he wrote. So you can see that the use of highly chromatic melodies go way, 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 way back. All right. How about the shape of a melody? Well, a melody can be conjunct, and that means that every note is next to each other, like Beethoven Ninth Symphony, for instance. All stepwise. Or they could be conjunct, like Valkyrie, Wagner, jumping all over the place. All right. Now, how about rhythm, though? Rhythm is rather interesting. I don't want to get into rhythm too much because I've got a whole other presentation that deals with meter and rhythm. So, but take a melody like this. That's from the Tchaikovsky Fourth Symphony. Notice that there's no rhythmic variety at all. All the same, bum, 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 bum. If you look at on the melody, just as a string of eighth notes without any variation at all. Now in the orchestra, of course, whoever plays the melody will slow up and speed up a little bit and contour it in order to make it sound vocal. But in terms of melody, it's absolutely no rhythmic variety at all. But take as a contrast. Here's a little piece of Bach, give you an idea of the two extremes of no rhythmic variety and lots of rhythmic variety. Making allowances for wrong notes, but you can see the difference. I mean, Bach is full of rhythmic variety. The Tchaikovsky is very static, and yet they're both beautiful. Because again, there's no rules. It depends on the artistry and the imagination of the composer to pull it off one way or the other. Okay, let's talk about form. What kind of shape does a melody take? Well, you can have what I call question and answer or antecedent consequence. The Beethoven Ninth Symphony is another good example of that. That's antecedent, all right? Ends in a question. Finish it. Okay, all right. The other form is the so-called ABA form, which is very, very common. ABA means you have a musical material here, and you have something different, which we call B, and then A returns again to cap it off and give it a nice rounded shape. All right. And it's not only in music, but in all the arts. For instance, if you see a painting and there's a little bit of red up in the upper corner, there's probably a little bit of red down here too in the corner to bring it together again. If you read a lyric poetry, I can bet your money that there's going to be something in the last stanza that's going to echo something that occurred in the first stanza, either a word or an idea or a sound. And the same thing is in music. ABA is a very common form. A good example would be Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. That's A. Then something different. Then A again. Let's get something a little bit more elaborate than that. Let's take a tune we used a little while ago, Over the Rainbow. And it repeats A again. Now something different, B. A again. Now here's where Arlen does something a little bit different. He takes a little bit of B and he just adds a little ending on this. So it's, again, it's A, which is okay, B, A, and then a little bit of B just kind of tack on at the end. Okay. There's one more thing that I want to talk about before we wind up because, oh my goodness, it's already 45 minutes. And that is elaboration or improvisation. And I want to go back to the Baroque era for that. In the Baroque era, very often what you would see on the page would be very different from what you would actually hear. I'm going to play a minuet by Handel twice. I'm going to play it just as it's written on the page, and then I'm going to try to ornament it in a way that would be common in the Baroque era. So here's the minuet exactly as is. Now here it is ornamented. Big difference. Now, one reason why keyboard music was always ornamented is because on a piano, for instance, I can play a note, and it sustains a pretty long time. It's about 7, 8, 9 seconds, like that. But on a harpsichord, which uses plucks instead of hammers, you go, that's it. So if you want to sustain a note on a harpsichord, you can't go, you have to do something with it. You have to maybe trill it or do some kind of ornamentation in order to extend the note. And that's one reason why so much keyboard music of the Baroque is heavily ornamented, because of the nature of the particular instrument. I think I've said everything I want to say about melody, because it's already 45 minutes and I'm told that's how much I've got. So let's spend the rest of the time answering any questions that I may not be able to answer.
Well, let's give him a big hand first. If you can hang out at the piano, we've got the microphone there.
Okay.
Over here.
I thoroughly enjoyed your lecture. I'm an amateur musician. I have one question for you. Can I make a comment first?
Sure.
I believe that we should never discontinue music or physical education. We have an obesity problem and a lack of musical culture in our country. Can you answer what is the difference between jazz and swing?
Well, jazz, for my part, I think jazz is an essentially improvisatory art. Jazz really involves taking a melody, which is either borrowed or original, and then 3 or 4 or 5 people, not more than that, get together and they improvise on it. Swing is really a written out composition. Now it may have moments in which there's improvisation, free improvisation, but I think that swing is much more structured rather than jazz, which is really kind of the moment. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Over here.
Yeah.
What kind of musical education did the composers in the 16th, 17th centuries have? I mean, you showed us a lot of interesting details of trills and interval. Did they have that kind of education, the early composers?
Well, first of all, the idea of a composer is fairly new. Before Beethoven, there was no such thing as a composer. You were a musician. And if a musician, you had to be a performer, you had to be a composer, you had to be a teacher, you had to be all sorts of things. And it wasn't until Beethoven and afterwards that there was an area of specialization that set in. But before Beethoven, a musician was expected to be able to compose decently, to be able to perform, to be able to teach. Bach was tuning harpsichords and organs, for that matter. He was teaching classes in Latin and church music in St. Thomas in Leipzig. It was a much more all-encompassing occupation, too.
What is your opinion?
But there was also an apprenticeship system too, I think, which also very helped the education in the early days too, before there were schools and conservatories and that sort of thing. Or look at the Russian Five. None of them had any formal education at all. They were all self-taught.
What is your opinion of atonal music?
Like any other school of music, I mean, there's some good stuff in it and some bad stuff in it. You know, well, let me put it this way. Are you familiar with Sturgeon's law? No. Okay. Back in the early 50s, there was a science fiction convention that was held here in Chicago, and there was a roundtable discussion talking about science fiction. And at the table there were the usual authors and publishers and fans and that sort of thing too. And this one guy got up in the audience and he raised his hand and he identified himself as a college literature instructor, English instructor. He said, you know, he said, I've never been able to take science fiction seriously as a literary genre because 95% of it is crap. And Theodore Sturgeon, who was on the raft, he said, 95% of everything is crap. Now, how does that apply? It means that when you're hearing the music of the past, you're hearing that 5% that has been filtered by judgment, by time, and that sort of thing. And to compare that 5% with the 100% of today, which is still not sorted out yet, really puts the music of today at a rather disadvantage. So all I can say in that case is that listen to the music, and if you don't like a piece, go on to something else, and you might like it better.
Can you tell us who your favorite composers are?
Who are my favorite children?
I was raised on classical music. I hate most of the noise I hear now. My question is, and I remember in being educated, I was told that the Beethoven Fifth, when first played, was booed by the audience and they walked out of the theater. Talk about how audiences received these classics in the days when they were originated.
Well, Mozart was considered excessively dissonant in his day. Would you believe it? Let's take a look. Well, actually, that brings up another question. And that is there are two words that are often used interchangeably: dissonance and discord. And I think we have to make a distinction between the two. A dissonance is a technical term which refers to a chord or an interval that is unstable and it requires resolution. For instance, that's a dissonant chord. Why? Because it wants to go there. All right. Take this chord here. That's a dissonance, but Schubert uses it. Or this one. Here. Bach, First Brandenburg Concerto. Or this one, Mozart. So what dissonance is really your dynamic element in music. It's what it leads from one harmony, from one note to the next. Bach is the most dissonant composer there is. Because if you listen to a movement by Bach, the harmony constantly goes to one, to another, to another, to another. You don't get complete resolution until the very end of the movement. That's the artistic use of dissonance. But discord is a subjective term. Discord is something that you personally don't happen to like. But keep the two terms separate. Dissonance is a technical term. Discord is a purely subjective one. Here's another dissonant one here too. Stravinsky used it in Rite of Spring because he wants a percussion effect in the strings. Actually, wonderful use of dissonance.
All right, let's hear it for him. Come on, he does a great job.